Thank you for that. Welcome to those joining us via live stream. I'm Bruce Smith, the Westland District Mayor. Now, I'd like to go around the table and get each of our participants to introduce themselves. Start with Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie Crichton. I'm the Group Manager of Corporate Services at Westland District Council.
And Simon Bastian.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Simon Bastian, Chief Executive of Westland District Council.
Councillor Martin.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Latham Martin, elected councillor for the Hokitika Ward on the Western District Council.
And Paul Madgwick.
Kia ora tātou, Paul Madgwick, iwi rep.
Scott Baxendale.
Hiya, Scott Baxendale. I'm the Group Manager District Assets for Westland District Council.
Councillor Anna Hart.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Anna Hart for the Northern Ward, Westland District Council.
And Councillor Cogan. Okay. And Francois.
Kia ora koutou, Francois Tūmahai, iwi representative for Te Runanga o Ngāti Waewae.
And Councillor Cogan.
Kia ora everybody, Jenny Cogan, Councillor.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, I want to thank those who've joined this Zoom meeting to enable Council to engage right across Westland in relation to Government's Three Waters proposal. Central Government wants to amalgamate and centralise water services from all 67 local councils. It's potable, which is drinking water, wastewater, which is sewage, and stormwater. The plan is to create 4 corporate monopolies like Auckland's Watercare, a new national regulator, Te Mara Arawai, which will determine water standards, is being legislated at the present time. This proposal comes with warnings of $160 billion or more need for upgrades across the nation. Your council delivers and supports the supply of good water delivered by all councils around New Zealand. As we receive more and more information from government expanding on the benefits of the proposed reforms, we're struggling to see how the reforms will benefit our Westland communities. The focus on water causing health issues by government is mischievous, with councils around New Zealand supplying clean, healthy water with very few exceptions. We note that our present council's LTP reflects considerably more spending on infrastructure than the amount that has been calculated. The transfer or confiscation of for many councils, 30% of total assets for an 8 cents in the dollar incentive payment feels very reckless. The proposed governance structure is complex, removing almost all local democracy. I'd now like to introduce you to Simon Bastian, the Chief Executive of the Western District Council for the last 4 years, who has driven, firstly, the attraction of tens of millions of dollars to this council for infrastructure upgrades, and has led a reform of our operations section. Simon, welcome to the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just to reiterate what Bruce's Your Worship has been saying, the focus on upgrading Three Waters across the sector, particularly the aged assets we've had for quite some time, started about 5 to 6 years ago. Really kicked off with the stormwater upgrades back in 2016 when we had some major flooding events. We've spent a lot of energy and a lot of focus on particularly the fresh water and ensuring that our facilities provide very top quality drinking water standards. The assets themselves, as we'll go through the presentation shortly, highlight that most of our water assets are very, very young, less than 10 years as a typical example. We have further investment happening in this space with both Fox and Arahura water treatment plants coming online in the very near future. So we do have some aged infrastructure which is concerned, and most of those are underground assets, particularly our aged pipelines. And we have capital within our LTP to address those shortcomings. Thank you, Bruce.
We'll now move on to the presentation, and it'll be done by the Chief Executive, Simon Bastian, Scott Baxendale, our Operations Manager, and Leslie Crichton, our financial expert, wizard.
Right, thank you, Bruce. So we have developed a slideshow which pretty well paints out where we're at right now, and also what the impacts of the Three Waters reform will be, and also touching on the transition process. So we'll take it to the next slide. Next slide, Emma, please. So what assets do we have in the ground? So within Westland. Across Westland, we have 9 drinking water supplies, and currently there's 2,763 ratepayers connected to our drinking water supply system. As alluded to, 2 of those supplies will be updated. We'll just scroll back to the original slide. 2 of those drinking water supplies facilities will be upgraded next two years. One is due to come online very shortly, which is the Arahura supply. We have 4 wastewater supplies, and they service just over 2,000 ratepayers. The largest of these is within Hokitika, and one reticulated stormwater supply, and that's within Hokitika itself. Next slide. Councillor, in terms of our assets themselves, the water assets are relatively new. All of them have current technology to ensure compliance monitoring. And we are currently upgrading some of our storage facilities, reservoirs, and renewing some of them with the $6.9 million of the tranche 1 payments from government. Next slide. In terms of wastewater treatment, Hokitika Wastewater Treatment Plant, we've got a planned upgrade for that to be completed in 2024. Franz Joseph Wastewater Treatment Plant has basically been completed and signed off last year. It has an expected lifespan of at least 15 years, and that obviously be reviewed closer to the end of its life. Fox Wastewater Treatment Plant and Haast both require upgrades, and they'll be completed over the next 20 years. The major issue with them is removing the sludge buildup, and we'll be looking to do that over the next 5 years. What we see in terms of risk with our wastewater treatment facilities is the discharge to waterways, and that's dependent on regulation. All of our plants are consented to be able to discharge to waterways, but if regulation changes this requirement, we'll have to review how we manage those discharge processes. Next slide. In terms of stormwater, we have done significant upgrades in infrastructure within the Hokitika Township. That started way back in 2016. We have some major works to be completed over the next 3 years around our stormwater infrastructure already budgeted for within the LTP. We have significant investment made in the last 5 years to address capacity. And as stated, further works to be done. Our highest risk point is in the ageing infrastructure underground. We have work underway at the moment to investigate leakage and also a non-compliant infrastructure hooked up to our current stormwater processes. So they have a program of works to be completed over the next 30 years. Next slide. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Scott to take us through the rest of the slides. Scott.
So why the reform and where this came from? Well, the new legislation is coming in following the 2016 Havelock North gastroenteritis outbreak. And it's led to the creation of a new national regulator. And it's looking at delivering services to communities consistently around the country. That's the mechanism behind it, and they're looking at introducing improvements and cost savings. If you look at the value of our current assets, the assets that we've got within Westland District are valued at $117 million. The government has put together a support package, and in exchange for that $117 million worth of assets, they're proposing that we will get 11.15 million as a support package. And the current revenue that we bring into Westland District per annum is $6 million. So in terms of the financial figures that we've been looking at, and we've done some modelling within Westland using the figures that we know and we understand, because they're based on a lot of research that we've done and knowledge that we've got about our own system. So the blue boxes show the Westland District Council figures. The orange boxes are the figures that have been put together by the government as part of this consultation. So if you look on the left-hand side at the figures, $1,079 is the current average annual Three Waters rates for domestic ratepayers across Westland District. And that is projected by 2051 to be a figure of $3,105. If you contrast that, the figures that the government have put together projected at 2051, the average annual Three Waters cost per household, they're talking about being $1,640, and they are projecting an average annual Three Waters, if we opt out of the reform, of $8,690. So there's clear differences between the figures that we're looking at and the figures that are being produced. There's a number of things that we are reviewing within the council, because Three Waters has an impact on the council that goes beyond water provision. So there are things called stranded overheads. So that is the contribution that Three Waters makes to funding within the council, things like corporate overheads, finance, IT, etc. And then something called stranded assets, which is things like the occupation of the council building in Hokitika. There's impacts potentially on debt funding for us. There are impacts on the depreciation reserves that the council holds, because those will be expected to be transferred to the new entities in 2024 if this goes ahead. And there's a whole issue around the council balance sheet after Three Waters assets reserved are transferred as well. So we've done some calculations looking at what our investment requirements are now until 2051. We've based this information on our knowledge and age profile of the assets in the stock. And if you look at the green line at the bottom, that shows a cumulative figure that goes by the end of 2051 to be just under $54 million. The blue line, which is going up at roughly about a 40-degree angle, is the investment that the government says will happen with Three Waters going forwards. That's what they say the required investment is, taking account of growth, but also improvements that they believe have to be made across the country. And that blue line, which goes up there, is a figure that's based on an average calculation that puts together a number of local authorities across New Zealand, irrespective of the condition of what's in the ground. So in terms of where these go, if this is something that's approved, there will be a lot of transition work to take place between now and 2024. These things can't just happen overnight. So what will happen in the meantime is, until July 2024, the council will still be responsible for water delivery and operational policy, although strategic oversight will be taken by the government to make sure that whatever Westland decides to do has to be consistent with the overall objectives of the water reform. There's also a lot of work for council that we need to do further investigation on. So we have to prepare for the transfer of the assets to the new entities. We have to look at the impact of taking $6 million a year revenue out of the council's balance sheet. We have to look at the impact on staff. So we will have staff that currently work full-time on the project, and there'll be an issue for them about, do they wish to go to the new entity and insecurities that go with that. We will also have staff that part of their job is Three Waters, so we'll have to work out how we extract that and manage that process. And then there's a whole range of other things around council bylaws and other council documentation that we would need to put together. And there would need to be a due diligence process where the government come in and look at all councils in New Zealand to make sure that all the numbers that are being produced and all the investment requirements are actually consistent. So there are things where we don't exactly know what impacts are coming forward. So there is a future reform of local government, and that review is already in its early stages. And there is reform of the Resource Management Act. There's the whole issue about how government compensation will work and how that particularly impacts on Westland and Westland's communities. There'll be things around, well, what efficiencies are there actually going to be? Because at the moment we're working with estimates. And what are the costs going to be? And how are we going to work with growth? And what are the governance arrangements going to be moving forwards? It was outlined earlier on that I think messy was the phrase that His Worship used. And then there's the whole thing about how will the new entities respond in natural hazards. And then finally, there is the complexity of integrating 67 different council approaches to Three Waters into 4 large national entities. So in terms of what the community has told us so far, the feedback that we have been receiving from the public indicates that the majority of respondents have not wished to opt in to Three Waters reform. There is a view that communities will lose their democratic say in the way that services are provided, and it is expressed that people want services to be managed, built and operated at a local level. There is a belief out there and a concern that reform won't necessarily improve efficiencies. And concerns have been raised around previous consolidation of assets that have not necessarily led to the improvements in the provision of services. And there are concerns that each region has different needs, and a concern that a one-size-fits-all approach might not necessarily fit with what's needed and will take control away from ratepayers. There is a view expressed that the process is undemocratic and is being imposed. And there are questions being asked around whether proof actually exists that council can't manage the assets themselves. And then finally, there is concern expressed around who's got control of the assets in relation to local authorities and Mayory. So we've had a number of questions that have come in from the community, and the four that we're going to pick up tonight that fit the common themes are outlined. The first one is, why is there such a huge difference in the projected average annual Three Waters costs of the government's figure of $8,690 and Westland District Council's figures of $3,105? Secondly, there's a question around whether stormwater is confined to Hokitika, as there are only 508 ratepayers connected to the scheme. Thirdly, there's a question about what's included within Westland District Council's current average annual Three Water rate of $1,079. And the person has expressed they have $527.40 for water and $410.95 for sewage. So what does the rest come to? And finally, when and if the reforms do happen, we've been given a projected 2051 average Three Waters cost of $1,640. What is this cost likely to be in the years leading to the year 2051?
Thank you, Scott. So I think we can cover these questions off one by one. If you just bear with me. The first question is actually quite complex to answer because the calculations used by DIA have been complex as well. So DIA has used the Water Industry Commission of Scotland model, which assumes that an average household is 2.7 people and households contribute 70% to the water revenue. They use these assumptions to estimate the average household costs for the individual local authorities and then the amalgamated entities. They've kept this number at 8,690 to average cost per household through to 2051. If there was no reform, as projecting costs over 30 years is uncertain, as well as affordability challenges to meet costs above this level. It's quite interesting that 23 of the local councils across the country have this cap threshold. So we are one of 23 with a figure of 8,690 as a figure. Effectively, DIA have determined that Westland needs to invest approximately $200 million on Three Waters over the next 10 years to keep it in pace with the replacement program, and thus absorbing, using the above assumptions. This is then used to calculate the average household. So it's quite complex. So in a nutshell, they've used a model based on assumptions out of the Scottish model. The second question, there are 508 known connections only within the boundary of Hokitika. Although every property is rated for stormwater through the community general rate, only Hokitika has a reticulated scheme. The third question, the government has used the average number of households using the service to calculate the average cost. For comparative purposes, the same methodology has been applied to a number of domestic ratepayers. The overall average is 1,079, which is comprised of 467.75 for water, 395.37 for wastewater, and 275.55 for stormwater. The actual costs in this current year vary from this, particularly for stormwater. The costs of which are spread over a high number of ratepayers through the community general rate. And finally, the last question, the average costs each year have been extracted from the government's model for entity D, who would own their water assets, which incorporates most of the South Island. The model assumes a constant increase of 1.25% year on year in connection households, starting with the estimated 324,067 connection households in the entity area in 2022 and ending with an estimate of 467,055 households, which is a 30% increase over the 30 years. So in 2022, the average cost is estimated to be 1,171, increasing to 1,629 by 2038 and 1,642 between 2039 to 2051. As it states, it's very complex, and the models are complex entities to try and work through. This is what's been quite challenging for us to look at our own models and understand these numbers and try and interpret them accordingly. What's happening next for Council? So Council will provide feedback to Government through October, and following this period of engagement, the Government will make more decisions on next steps in the reform process, including mechanisms for community consultation, which is a requirement because these assets are a strategic asset of Council. Back to you, Your Worship.
Thanks, Simon and Scott. I want to thank those people that have been sending in questions. There's been quite a few of them. And I want to give you an indication. This has only been open a few days. We've had 110 written submissions already. 3% of those wish to opt in to the reforms, and the balance wish to opt out. And some of them, I have to say, wish to opt out in a very strong, forceful way. A reminder of the need for more feedback. You know, if you want Council to opt in, please let us know. If you want Council to opt out, please let us know. If you have feedback of any nature, email us, and the email address is threewatersreform@westlanddc.govt.nz. You may wish to give us your feedback using Council's online feedback form. It's really easy to do. Go to the Council website. On the left-hand side is the Three Waters Reform link. Click on it, and there's a submission form there. Very easy to do. Now, you might not be into computers, and that's fine as well, because you can post your feedback, or you can drop it into Council reception. It's really important that you do feedback. This is the most significant thing that many of us have seen actually in our lifetimes when it comes to local government. The consequences of this proposal are far-reaching, and it's an important matter. It's important that deserves our attention, which is why we're here tonight, and your attention by way of feedback. Now, there's going to be another 2 Zoom information sessions on Monday. That's the 6th of September. One's at 12 noon and one's at 6 p.m. Our hope is that if you have questions from tonight's session that you'll email them so that we can bring them up in the next 2 sessions. And once again, that email address is 3 Waters Reform, and 3 is the figure 3 at westlanddc.govt.nz. That's our email address. And that will allow us to consider the feedback and then prepare a response at the next live streamed meeting on Monday. So I want to thank the councillors and the staff who have attended tonight. But more importantly, I can see a large number of people who are following this live stream. Thank you so much for being interested. Make sure you get your feedback in. It's just so important. And it's still early in the night. I suggest you go and enjoy it with your family. And we'll look forward to seeing you again on Monday at 12 p.m. and then later in the day at 6 p.m. So councillors, members of the public and staff, thank you very much. And on that basis, I'll declare this engagement session closed.